Okay, we'll start now the laws of Rosh Hashana. I'm going to learn from the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. The Alter Rebbe has the laws of Rosh Hashana starting in Siman Tov Kuf Pei Beis. And I'll, as usual, say some things outside that are not written inside the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. The Alter Rebbe starts off talking about the laws of davening that apply to Rosh Hashana and the Aseret Yimei Teshuvah from Rosh Hashana throughout Yom Kippur. And the Alter Rebbe says that in Shemona Esrei there's two changes that are made that in the endings of the brachas. In the end of the third bracha, we usually say during the year Baruch Atah Hashem Okel HaKadosh, and from Rosh Hashanah throughout Yom Kippur we say HaMelech HaKadosh, the Holy King. Same thing is in the 11th bracha of Shemona Esrei. We usually finish off Melech Oyev Tzedakah Mishpat, the king that loves tzedakah, doing tzedakah and judgment. But on Aseret Yimei Teshuvah we say HaMelech HaMishpat, that is the king that judges. We take out the word tzedakah, we take out the word charity, whatever you want to call it, righteousness. Because in these days Hashem shows His kingdom. Hashem is judging the world, and Hashem shows His kingdom more than the rest of the year. So therefore we change the bracha from Hokel HaKadosh to HaMelech HaKadosh, the Holy King. And from Melech Oyev Tzedakah Mishpat, we change it to HaMelech HaMishpat. And as the Alter Rebbe says, we're going to soon see that in the rest of the year, the main thing is tzedakah. We first say Melech Oyev Tzedakah Mishpat, Hashem loves tzedakah, charity, and only then do we mention judgment. And however, during these days, the main thing is mishpat, the main thing is the idea of judgment, because these are the days that Hashem is judging the world, and on a be'ikr. So therefore, we don't mention at all the concept of tzedakah. So what happens if somebody made a mistake and forgot and said Hokel HaKadosh instead of saying HaMelech HaKadosh? Or if he's not sure what he said, he's not sure whether he finished off HaMelech HaKadosh or he finished off Hokel HaKadosh. So if he remembered right away, the amount of time, as Alter Rebbe says, that it takes to say the amount of time it takes for a student to greet his teacher, which is Shalom Alecha Rebbe, 3 words, peace upon you, my Rebbe. So if he waited the amount of time after he said Okel HaKadosh, and then after that amount of time he remembered, he would have to go back to the beginning of Shemona Esrei. It doesn't just go back to the beginning of Ater Kadosh, because since the 3 first brachas of Shemona Esrei are all considered as one bracha, so therefore if you made a mistake in Okel HaKadosh, you has to go back to the beginning of Shemona Esrei. Likewise, if you started already the next bracha, whether it's during the weekdays at the Choynein or in Rosh Hashana, at the V'chartan, or whatever it might be, if you already started the next bracha and then he realized that he made a mistake and he said Okel HaKadosh, so even if he didn't say, he only said the first word of the next bracha, so it's not still within the time of Teich Kedei Dibur, of the amount of time it says to say 3 words, Shalom Alecha Rebbe, but since he already started the next bracha, it's already too late, and he has to go back to the beginning of Shemona Esrei. However, if he remembers right away, within the amount of time it takes to say these 3 words, so he right away corrects himself, and he doesn't have to continue. And he doesn't have to go back to the beginning. The same thing that the Rebbe says when it comes regarding HaMelech HaMishpat. If a person made a mistake and said Melech Oyev Tzedakah Mishpat, a king that loves tzedakah and mishpat, which we say during the rest of the year, so then there is an argument. If he remembers within the amount of time of Teich Kedei Dibur, within the amount of time it takes to say 3 words, Shalom Alecha Rebbe, then he can right away correct and say HaMelech HaMishpat and continue. But what if he remembered after that amount of time? Or if you already started the next bracha, so then there's a machlokes. One opinion says that he doesn't have to go back because he mentioned Melech. The main thing over here is the idea of kingdom, which he mentioned by saying Melech Oyev Tzedakah Mishpat. The other opinion says that if he remembers before he finishes Shemona Esrei, he has to go back to the beginning of the bracha Shiva Sheftenu. And if he remembered after he finished Shemona Esrei, he has to go back to the beginning of Shemona Esrei, because, like I mentioned before, that according to this opinion, since during the rest of the year, the tzedakah, we're saying during the rest of the year, we first say Melech Oyev Tzedakah Mishpat. First we mention the idea of tzedakah, and only then do we mention the idea of mishpat. First is charity and then judgment. But these days we don't mention tzedakah at all. We only mention judgment because that's the main midah, that's the main thing that's taking place these days. So therefore, according to this opinion, mentioning tzedakah at the end of this bracha, and particularly that he's mentioning it before mishpat, is not right, and therefore you would have to go back and correct the mistake. So the Alter Rebbe says, linyan halacha, v'pel mamish, what do we do? So the Alter Rebbe says, the safik bracha is lahakal. And there's an argument whether you have to say a bracha or not, you're always lenient and you don't go back. The Alter Rebbe says, if he remembered before he finished Shemona Esrei, he doesn't go back to the bracha v'shiva, because if he were to go back, it's a safik bracha levatal. He might be saying it in vain, according to those opinions that say that he could just continue Shemona Esrei. But after he finishes Shemona Esrei, the Alter Rebbe says it's good. The Alter Rebbe doesn't say it's a chiyuv, but it's good that he should go back and daven again, b'teiras nedav. He should daven again as what we call a tfilas nedava, that there's such a concept in halacha that one davens a Shemona Esrei not as an obligation, but as like a donation sort of. So you should daven again as a tfilas nedava. But he does not have to say anything. Usually when the person davens at tfilas nedava, the Alter Rebbe explains in the halachos of tfilas nedava that he would have to be mechadish something. He would have to add some of his own words, whether it's in preferably in every bracha, at least in one bracha, however it might be. But over here, since according to some opinions, he has to daven Shemona Esrei anyway again, so he's doing it because of a suffix. So therefore, he doesn't have to. When he davens his tfilas nedav, he doesn't have to do it exactly as a regular tfilas nedav is done. You have to add something, but he just davens it again. This same thing would apply. Now, the mistake of a Melech HaMishpat obviously cannot take place during Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur when we don't say a regular Shemona Esrei. But it could already start to maitiv on Matzi Rosh Hashanah. You could already have this problem. Now, even though it's maitiv, Matzi Rosh Hashanah, you still, if a person would make a mistake, the same thing would apply not only to Shachris and Mincha, but Pashas would also apply to maitiv on Matzi Rosh Hashanah, that if you forgot and he didn't say, and he said Melech Oiv Tzedakah Mishpat, if he didn't correct himself, Teich Kedei Dibur, he goes back. He doesn't go back to the Hashiva. He continues Shemona Esrei, but he would say again. He would daven again. It's best if he would daven again at Tfilas Nedava. Regarding the mistake of saying Hakeh from Melech HaKadosh to saying Hakel HaKadosh, usually in Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur itself, this mistake is very uncommon. And even if a person doesn't remember whether he said Hakel HaKadosh or Melech HaKadosh, but most probably if he's davening from a machzor, which people are usually doing because they don't know the Shemona Esrei by heart, or even if he does know it by heart. But since the third bracha of Shemona Esrei, the whole bracha of Ata Kadosh, we add a whole long addition over there on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur itself. So the end of the bracha is anyway, he's not used to this whole thing, so there's no reason why we should say that he finished off as he finished off the rest of the year, because he's not at all saying the words of that bracha that he would say right before the end anyway. That we should say that his hergel haloshen, that the way his tongue is used as a finish of Hakel HaKadosh. So unless he knows for sure that he made a mistake, he would have to go back. But if he's saying it from the machzor, or if he's davening, if he's saying the whole extra bracha the way it is in Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, most probably he said it with the way it's written in the Siddur, the machzor, which is HaMelech HaKadosh. But during the regular week, 7 days in between, this mistake could happen. Those that say that if a person during the time when it came to say Zachreno Michamecha Zosumin, during the first bracha, the second bracha, you add certain things. Sakana Sagonim say Zachreno L'chaim and Michamecha. So if during that time he knows that he had in mind to say HaMelech HaKadosh, at that time he had a mental note and set to say HaMelech HaKadosh, and then later, he, I guess not right afterwards, but a little bit later, during Shemona Esrei, he doesn't remember what he said, HaMelech HaKadosh. Those that say that he can rely on the fact that he probably said HaMelech HaKadosh because earlier he definitely had a mental note in his head to say it. Obviously, if one, right after he said HaMelech HaKadosh or Hakel HaKadosh, he doesn't know what he said, he can't rely on the fact that he had a mental note before because he obviously just said it and he wasn't thinking about what he just said. So then we would say, if he doesn't know what he said, we would say that he would probably say what he said during the rest of the year. There's also another pointer that happens a lot of times to people, is that they daven Shemona Esrei and a half hour later, they they chapsich, they don't know whether they said Hakei LaKadosh or Melech HaKadosh. So then also brought down halacha that if he knows when he davened Shemoneh Esrei, he had a mind to say it properly, but just later on he doesn't remember, it comes later on during the day, a while later he doesn't remember if he said it properly. So since at the time of davening he had a mind to say it the way it's supposed to be, we assume that he probably said it the way it's supposed to be. The same thing would apply to a chazan. If the chazan is saying chazaras hashatz and he makes the mistake, so the same thing would be that if he makes a mistake and he says Hamelech Hakei LaKadosh instead of Hamelech HaKadosh and doesn't correct himself right away, he would have to go back. And the way it's brought down in Paskin, he would have to say Kedusha again. So there's more pratim here to those that say that if he has a suffix, if it was Teich Kedei Dibur or not, he doesn't have to go back. If he said just the word Hakei, he didn't finish HaKadosh, he doesn't have to go back, it just says Hamelech HaKadosh. At any rate, it's always important to daven from a siddur and to pay attention to what we're saying, frat as we'll see during the Aseret Simei Tshuva. Then the Alter Rebbe in Siv Gimel, Tavkuf Pei Beis, Siv Gimel, he says, what happens if a person said 90 times, Baruch Atah Hashem HaMelech HaKadosh, Baruch Atah Hashem HaMelech HaMishpat, and then he has a suffix, he has his doubt whether he said in Tefillah, he said in Davening HaMelech HaKadosh or not. So he has to go back. Although when it comes to Meirit HaTol, there's a halacha that if somebody said it 90 times, we say that his tongue is already used to saying it properly. However, over here, when he's practicing to say Hashem's name, he obviously can't, when he's practicing to say Melech HaKadosh, he obviously can't say Hashem's name when he's practicing. So therefore, we say that if he's just going to practice saying the bracha 90 times and finishing Baruch Atah Hashem HaMelech HaKadosh, but since he can't say Hashem's name, so when he's going to say it in davening, or there he's going to actually say Hashem's name the way we say it, so he's going to go back probably to the way he's used to and say Hakei LaKadosh instead of saying Hamelech HaKadosh. Same thing is in Magin Avis, in the bracha that we say Friday night after Shemoneh Esrei. Also over there, as we see in the Siddur, we say Hamelech HaKadosh instead of Hakei LaKadosh. The Alter Rebbe brings down here those that would used to daven Shemoneh Esrei. They would have their body bent down when they would daven during Shemoneh Esrei, during the whole Shemoneh Esrei. The Alter Rebbe says that they have to, at the beginning of each bracha, at the end of each bracha, they have to stand straight, and also before those places that we bow down at the end of the bracha, at the beginning of the bracha, at the end of Magen Avraham, and by Moedim, the beginning and the end, he has to stand up a few words before. So this is all in order that it shouldn't look like he's adding the Chachamim established that a person only bows down at 4 times in davening. If he's going to bow down, if he bows down during the rest of davening, is one thing. But if he's going to bow down at the end and the beginning of other brachas, or if he's going to remain, if he's not going to stand up a few words before the end of Magen Avraham and Moedim, and at the end of Moedim where he's supposed to bow down, then it won't seem that he's fulfilling the Takanas Chachamim to bow down at that point. And it also will seem, if he's going to bow down at the beginning of the other brachas, it will seem that he's adding on the Takanas Chachamim, on the establishment of the Chachamim, to only bow down during those points of davening. However, if he stands up during the beginning of the brachas, he only remains bowing down in the middle of the brachas, so it was no takanas chachamim to bow down in the middle of the brachas, so it's not going to look like he's adding anything on the takanas chachamim. Then the Alter Rebbe says, he brings down in Sivav and on, that we add Zochreinu L'chaim, and in Magen Avraham, and Ata Gibor, we add Micha. And then by Moedim we add Chsoiv L'chaim Tovim, and by Sim Shalom we add B'Sefer Chaim, and so on. So there, these things are only Takonas HaGoyim, they're not mentioned in Gemara. So if a person forgets to say them, if he remembers before he says Hashem's name at the end of the bracha, so he says it right where he remembers. He doesn't have to go back to exactly the point in the bracha where you say this addition, he just says it where he remembers. And then he continues on. If he's holding by Hashem's name, I guess he says Baruch Atah Hashem. But once he already said Hashem's name, he shouldn't go back. He also should not. He shouldn't say it where he remembered. He also should not go back to the beginning of the bracha, because it's already a bracha levatala, because since it's only a tikkun hagoyim, was only established in the times of the goyim, so it's not, you can't say a bracha again for it. There are those that say that all these things that a person forgets, if he wants to, he could say it again he could say it after Nalakain Tzoid, after Yul Ratzon, the first Yul Ratzon, he could make up and say Zachrenu L'chaim, whatever it is there. Then the Alter Rebbe goes in different things of different words in davening that a person, different yukim in the tefillah, to say with the proper nekudas. And he said, for example, the word L'chaim, you should say with L'chaim, not L'chaim. Because L'chaim could sound like it's Loichaim, not life. And you have to be very careful, since it's days of judgment, you have to be very careful to daven and to say your tefillah in exactly the way it's supposed to be. However, during the rest of the years, we're not so medayik in this. During the rest of the years, its main thing is the kavanas halev, the intention of the heart. So there are people that do say V'amdeinu Malkeinu L'chaim, and so on. So you should, during the days of Rosh Hashana, you have to be very careful to pronounce the word properly. And obviously you should make sure that you have, it's important to make sure to have a machzer that's proper, and ulai yesh loimer, perhaps one could add that in these days that they have machzerim that are reprinted and that they're much better readable than the old style machzerim, so it will probably be helpful to pronounce the words correctly, to use a proper machzer that person feels would help him pronounce the words as proper as possible. Then the Alter Rebbe goes into different things that we do say in davening, we don't say in davening. He says that we don't say by Zachrenu L'chaim. There's a difference between when we say Zachrenu L'chaim in the first bracha of Shemoneh Esrei. Then we say Zachrenu L'chaim, remember us for life. But then later on, and then the Shemoneh Esrei, when it comes to Chsev L'chaim Tovim, there we say Chsev L'chaim Tovim, write us in, inscribe us in for good life. So the Rebbe says, why don't we say earlier in the beginning of Shemoneh Esrei, why don't we say Zachrenu L'chaim Tovim, remember us for good life? So it says, because when you ask something, you first have to ask something small, then you ask for something big. First you ask for life. So you say Zachrenu L'chaim, then we ask, later we already asked for life, then we add more to our request and we ask for good life. The minig also is that by Chazaras Hashatz we say, the Rebbe's letter explains why, but the minig is that the congregation, when it comes to Chsev L'chaim Tovim and the Sefer Chaim Tovim Shalom, they say it together when the Chazan reaches there, so he waits and the whole community says it, and then the Chazan repeats it. The Rebbe goes on to speak about certain things we omit in Rosh Hashana. We don't mention the Rosh Chodesh in davening, because Rosh Hashana is called Yom HaZikaron, and Rosh Chodesh is also called the Day of Zikaron, Day of Remembrance. We don't say Miyadim L'Simcha, Chag Muzmanim L'Sasin, holidays of joy, because Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur wasn't given for joy. It's a serious time. We don't say V'asiyenu Sprigas Medecha. We don't say the parts in Shemoneh Esrei we usually say in Sholosh Yigalim that we ask Hashem to give us the blessing of His Yomim Tovim, because the blessings, that's only specific for the 3 Yomim Tovim. Musaf, we also don't say that we can't go up and see your face, as we say the rest of the Yomim Tovim, because there's no chiyuv, there's no obligation to go up and see Hashem the Beis HaMikdash only during the 3 Yomim Tovim of Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. Another few diyukim that Alter Rebbe writes, Shulton, to make sure to say with the comets, not Shilton, Varisha, to say with the chirik, a few different things, and certain things that Rebbe in the Siddur changes from what the Rebbe writes here in Shulchan Aruch, how you finish off the brachas, Dvarach HaEmes, Dvarach HaMalkeinu Emes, and here he writes Shulchan Aruch, you say Dvarach HaEmes, and Siddur writes Dvarach HaMalkeinu. By Kadeshim, from Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippur, custom is to say, that Rebbe writes to say Leila Ula Eila. Our custom is we only say that by Ne'ilah, Leila Leila. The rest of Seres Yemei Tshuva, we say the reg just one Leila. Another thing what they say, Ba'ava Mikra Kodesh, Rebbe in the Siddur changed that by Shabbos. They do say Ba'ava. At any rate, Rebbe finishes off the siman that the minig is that everybody wishes his friend L'shana Tova Tikasev, And in the Siddur he says, L'shana Tova T'kasev V'seichasim, we all wish each other you should be inscribed and sealed for a good year. And we don't say this, the Alter Rebbe says, you don't say this in the second day of Rosh Hashana after midday, because the inscribing of Rosh Hashana was already done. So therefore you don't say it, from then on. Our minhag is that we only say it the first night. We don't even say it the next day in the morning. Also, in the Indian, there's a famous thing. One of the Rabbeim said, Rebbe Marash, whoever it is, that the Malachim, L'mayla, they're waiting to hear that a Yid should say a good word about another Yid, to bless him, and so saying L'shana Tova T'kasev V'seichasim is not stam good wishing, but it's also meaning that each Yid should daven for another Yid, to show that just like when it comes before Chodesh Elul, we write to each other Ksiva Achsima Tova, that itself, when the Malachim are looking to bring the brachas that one Yid blesses another Yid, and through that to be Melamed Schus and to be Mamshech brachas, draw down brachas L'mayla for all the Jewish people. Then the Alter Rebbe speaks, and Tavkuf Pei Gimel, the Alter Rebbe speaks about the different types of foods that we eat in Rosh Hashana. The Alter Rebbe brings down the famous Gemara that Rosh Hashana a person should eat karti, which is translated as leek, silka, which Alter Rebbe says is tardin, which is commonly translated as beets, although there's a whole discussion. Tzemach Tzedek has a tshuva also he speaks about this, whether it's beets or not. Then there's dates, there's kra, it's a certain, it's a gourd, a certain type of vegetable species that pumpkins are part of, and other things like cucumbers as well. Then there's rubia, which is tilson, which people translate as fenugreek, a certain type of plantation. It's a variety of other opinions on some of these names, exactly what they are. But at any rate, one thing is, Alter Rebbe says, the Shulchan Aruch says that also other things that are called in other countries with the name of rubia, and anything, the name of ribui, anything that means adding, to multiply, we eat it. So that's why, for example, eating carrots became one of the reasons why it is brought down to eat carrots, is because in certain countries it was called meren, which means to multiply. So in each country, people should eat based on that country what means multiply. The Alter Rebbe has yehiratzins, a bunch of yehiratzins which are said by a lot of these things. In the Siddur, the only yehiratzin he brings is for the apple dipped in honey. The Rebbe says that those that eat an apple dipped in we eat an apple dipped in honey, and we say T'chadesh Aleinu Shana Tova, that we send the way the minhag is, minhag Chabad, is that we say Yebracha B'eri Pri Ha'etz, and we dip the apple in the honey. First we dip the apple in the honey, we say the Bracha B'eri Pri Ha'etz, and then we say the Yehiratzin, that Shedechad Yehiratzin L'fanecha, Shedechad Aleinu Shana Tova Masukah. And we are mafsik with, we say the Yehiratzin between the Bracha and the actual eating of the apple. But the other things, although we eat the other things, for example, we eat pomegranates, because it's that we should, as the Alter Rebbe writes, we should have as many merits, as many mitzvahs as the seeds in a pomegranate, and so on. But where we eat the head of a fish and whatever, and other Simonim, I guess, that people have. But nevertheless, we only say the hiratzin over the honey that's in only the apple that's dipped in honey. Seems, I don't know, from one hand one might say that you should make the bracha on the apple before you cut it. Some places brought down that the Rebbe would first, there's need to make a bracha on an apple, you're supposed to first make a bracha when it's shalim, and then you cut it. In other places it seems, whether it's correct or not, obviously I don't know, but other places it seems, like Minhagei Chabad brings down that the Rebbe would first cut it and then dip it in honey. At any rate, that's the Yehiratzin we say. Now, even though there are other, for example, Rimonim, pomegranates is one of the Shiva Saminim, pomegranates is one of the 7 species. that al pi halacha, if you have on the table, you have one of the 7 species that Eretz Yisrael was praised with, and then you have a regular fruit, you have to make a yehi ratzon, you have to make a bracha first on the 7 species, and only then could you make on the apple. But nevertheless, I guess mitzad, the inyan that is tafka shaykh to the night of Rosh Hashana to have the apple, so you first make a bracha on the apple, even though you have the pomegranates on the table. But one thing that is important to keep in mind is that the boire priya eitz, if you're having other fruits on the table, that you should have in mind that the boire priya eitz should go on them as well. And the same thing would be is the kampot. If somebody's eating after the meal, he's eating fruits. So even though it seems that there are different quotations here, say from Hagim, but it seems from other places that when you say boire priya eitz, on the apple you have in mind also any fruit that you might eat at the end of the meal as a dessert. And he brings down here from the Rebbe that the Rebbe before, it happened once, whatever it is, that he would put he'd put a piece of the apple that he ate in the beginning of the meal together with the kompot, together with at the end of, the fruits for the end of the meal. And at the end of the meal, he ate the apple, and then he ate the rest, and then he ate that piece of the apple, and then he ate the rest of the other fruits, and he didn't make a bracha on the other fruits because he was yotze them with the ha'etz. Another thing is also the shechiyonu. Both nights of Rosh Hashana we make shechiyonu and kiddush. So the shechiyonu that you're making on kiddush, the second night we make shechiyonu, we b'dafke have a new fruit because of the question whether they're supposed to make shechiyonu the second night or not. So in order to be yotze all the days, we have a new fruit. Even though even if you don't have a new fruit, you make shechiyonu. But the first night, if you're having let's say you're having pomegranates, which you should make a shechiyonu on, so you should have in mind, in order to avoid having to make a bracha, extra bracha for no reason, when you say shechiyonu in kiddush, you should have in mind the pomegranates or whatever other things you might have that are on the table. You should bring them at the table to have them in mind for shechiyonu, so you don't have to run in the shaila of making a shechiyonu on the pomegranate. We also dip the hamoitzi in honey, and over here the dose means brought up. There's the whole thing because apikabol is in the dafka to put in salt. So it seems that there is an Indian, the dough, at least maybe the Rebbe did, whatever, that at least besides dipping a piece in honey, you also dip a piece in salt. And you dip 3 times in honey, then 3 times in salt. Whatever it is, some people don't use salt at all. But it could be that there is an Indian besides, according to some in Hagam, besides dipping the hamoitzi in honey, you also dip it in salt as well. The Altrab also writes, the minig is to eat fatty meat and all sweet, and to drink honey and all sweet things, in order that the year should be sweet and fatty. As it brings on a pasuk in Ezra, where it says, "Ichlu mashmanim shesumam takim," we should eat fatty foods and drink sweet drinks, because it was speaking about Rosh Hashana. Because in Rosh Hashana you should have a good year, so you eat these things. There's also, the Alter Rebbe brings that you should eat the head of a ram, to remember the ram of the Akedah Yitzchak, which one of the main reasons why we blow Sheif in Rosh Hashana, is to remember the Akedah of Yitzchak. If he doesn't have the head of a ram, he should eat the head of a sheep. If he doesn't have the head of a sheep, he should eat the head of any other head of another kosher animal, whatever it might be, a kosher bird, or a kosher fish. Because you want to say Niya l'reish v'loi l'zanav, that we should when you have in mind that we should be to a head and not to a tail. As Chassidim used to say, that we should be Niya l'reish, means we should be connected to the Rosh, connected to the head of the generation, to the Rebbe. Those that don't eat egoism veluzim, they don't eat nuts or small nuts, sandwiches and other stuff, because they make a person's, give a person a lot of saliva and they stop him from davening. And also, the word egois is brought down the same numerical value as the word chet, a sin, so you don't want to have that in Rosh Hashana. So other minhagim that are brought down, other people didn't eat beans or Other stuff in Rosh Hashana, for the same reason that it causes a lot of saliva in the mouth and it doesn't help for davening. Then there's those that eat, the Alter Rebbe brings to eat fish, should eat fish in order to multiply like fish. Obviously those that eat the head of a fish, so they're having both things inside the head and inside fish, but you don't cook it in chometz, you don't cook it in vinegar, you don't cook it in something bitter. And this itself, already there's different minhagim, different people, that they wouldn't eat anything bitter when it came to Rosh Hashanah up until through Hashana Rab, according to some people. They wouldn't have any chrein, any horseradish or other things that are bitter because of this Indian that you should only have things that are sweet. The Alter Rebbe finishes off in Siman Tov Kuf Pei Gimel about the minute to go to Tashlich. You go to a river that has live fish, in order which is a siman that they shouldn't have. We know that no evil eye affects Shailit, rules over fish, so you don't want to have an evil eye. And that we should have multiply as fish, and we say that the thing of Tashlich, and it's good to be outside of the city. And the Siddur, the Alter Rebbe mainly explains that the reason why you go to Tashlich is more al pi Kabbalah, is because you go out of the city to a well of water or a spring, because water shows on chesed, and also fish show an open eye. And you say the 13 midas, and then we shake off the talus cotton. At any rate, we go on the first day before mincha. Our minhag is that if the first day of Rosh Hashanah is on Shabbos, we go the second day. It's obviously important, as Pas can bring down, that when you go to Tashlich, it shouldn't turn into a taruvah situation of men and women mixed. And if there is such a situation, as my father would always say, that if women dafka need to go to Tashlich, so as the Rebbe once told Rabbi Hecht, Olav Hashem, that if he lived in his flatbush and it was hard for him, whatever, the Rebbe said he could open up the faucet of water and say Tashlich. So, it's a simon to have water, so you have water. It doesn't have to, the mitzvah of going to Tashlich doesn't have to, overweigh, obviously, other considerations of taruvas and so on. Alter Rebbe finishes off that the minhag is not to sleep on the day of Rosh Hashanah, in order that a person's mazel should not sleep. And somebody that is wasting his time is like he's sleeping. However, after midday, those that we used to go to sleep, that Izal and others, at any rate. Now, it's brought down this with people. It's way it's understood. It doesn't only mean not to sleep after davening, but also in the morning, a person should wake up before daylight. And at least the first day l'chol hapachas. In order, it says they shouldn't sleep by day. It doesn't only mean by day as you should get up your regular time and then. You shouldn't go to sleep after davening, particularly it's after Chatzos, and after Chatzos, Alter Rebbe brings it those that would go to sleep. But during the beginning of the day, you should to wake up early in Rosh Hashanah, unless the person will be able to daven properly, whatever it is, and each one on his own. But the person shouldn't try not to sleep the day of Rosh Hashanah, at least, I guess, the first day they say, should try. Anyway, everybody, Shabbat, Ksivach, Simatayv, Lashana Tayv, Mesukah, Shnaz Gulav Yeshua, take it from Yad Mamash.